We are ready for our last talk for Pragma New York. And without further ado, I'd like to bring on Ben from Optimism and Robert from Flashbots to talk about the future of rollups. Please give them a big round of applause.
That's one too. Yo, screw giving applause to us. How about for Karthik and the rest of the ETHGlobal Pragma crew for an amazing event? Wow.
Hell yeah. Wow, that was pretty hype.
We got to be hype. I mean, I think they should have made David's presentation the last one, to be honest, because that was the most bullish shit I've seen in a while.
We really needed that about 2 months ago. We're feeling pretty good now. Yeah. So Ben and I are going to be having a conversation. I'm going to be asking him a couple questions. He's going to be asking me a little bit. Why don't we just start off? Ben, can you talk about what Optimism and the Superchain is?
Heck yeah. So, David was just up here talking about the importance of ETH being a really resilient, grandchildren, great-grandchildren kind of a network. But it's also the case that to bring crypto to the masses, we need to scale these chains. What that means is that we need to be able to handle all of the demand for block space for sending transactions on chain that everybody has. So what Optimism is doing is building what we call the Superchain, a technology stack called the OP stack, that allows us to build more chains, these layer 2 chains that are themselves extensions of Ethereum. So they use this stuff called being a roll-up, data availability, whatever. Whether all those details matter for this conversation, probably not. But what is important to understand is that they inherit the security of Ethereum. So they allow you to spawn more chains that borrow security from Ethereum, but increase the throughput so that we can satisfy the demand of the global on-chain economy. So folks like Base, World, Unichain, many, many others in the Superchain are using the OP stack to scale block space.
And what's the Superchain?
So the Superchain is just the term that we use to refer to the network of aligned chains that are participating in this scaling journey together. So it's basically like the OP stack is the word for the technology, the just like open source MIT licensed like code base that anyone can go and do something with. And then the Superchain refers to the set of people that are using that technology stack that are actually building real chains that are like live on Ethereum in production running.
There's a recent trend of closed source software within crypto. We have a bunch of closed source smart contracts getting traction on Solana. We have a bunch of closed source sequencers these days. But Optimism and the Superchain have leaned in super hard to open source. Why is that a competitive advantage for you or for any of the chains that are using the OP stack?
I think in a lot of ways, actually, it probably echoes what David was just saying about EVM network effects. But basically, the philosophy that Optimism takes to scaling crypto, and I think the philosophy that we should be taking as an industry, is that we need to build the version, as close to the platonic version of the thing that we know should exist, not something that we think can exist and make us a lot of money, but the thing that should exist and should be the long-term dominant play. And if you look at the pre-crypto web, if you look at Web 2, a lot of what you see and a lot of things being closed source in Web 2 are a result of people looking at some market opportunity, realizing that they can build a closed source product and extract from that closed source product to make money. That is only a local maxima. It is not the global maxima of technology. So if block space is going to be everywhere and everyone's going to be running these EVM chains, there should be an open source free, do whatever you want with this code base to make a chain piece of software. That should exist. And you could argue, oh, you should make a closed source, slap a license on it that allows you to charge some percentage of transaction fees and go off to the races. But it's our view that the positive network effects that will come out of that outweigh the short-term gains you could make. So the fact that everybody building in the Superchain is contributing to the same code base and making it better. People are coming along that don't want to pay us, that just want to use the software, are also updating that software and making it better. All of that value can return to the stack and make the OP stack the platonic way to scale blockchains.
And what is the role of the OP stack and rollups more broadly in a world where increasingly users and rollups are kind of bringing their own asset? And so the thinking behind the question is that Originally, a really important part of rollups was that you had a way to take assets on ETH mainnet, like USDC, like ETH, bridge it onto a rollup, and then you use those assets in a really secure way, in a way that inherited the security of L1. But if you're a fintech company, you have all these customer deposits already, you have all this USDC or this USD already, you can just bring that onto your chain. You don't really need the bridge to ETH mainnet. You don't really need those same security guarantees. So what's the role of a rollup and the OP stack in this world, increasingly of fintech companies launching their own chains?
Yeah, definitely you're right that the writing's on the wall. I mean, I loved it. I guess for those in the audience you can't see, but we are looking at a beautiful vista of Manhattan across the water right now and like looking at the financial district. And I think David was right to say that like we are waking up, but great choice, Karthik, on this venue space, my God. You're welcome. So, I think, quite frankly, I think as an industry, we are learning to undo some of the tight coupling mistakes that we made in our past. And basically what I mean to say by that is that you're right. We built L2s, and part of the reason to build an L2 was to make it very amenable to bridging. And I think that's actually maybe a slightly different framing than we used to think of it back in the day. It's like an L2 is a bridge, but there are actually two different things going on here. There's the notion of a chain that progresses transactions and like updates state in a decentralized, accessible way. And then there's the notion of bridging, which is to take some asset in that state and move it to some other state that isn't the same chain. Ultimately, I think what we're going to come to realize is that both of these things are valuable in different contexts. And the security properties of both of those things can be different and valuable in different ways. So at the end of the day, the reason that all these centralized entities still have an incredible use to be found in chains is because there is value in having a decentralized open ledger that anybody can come and transact in and participate in. Even if that is a very centralized player doing very centralized things, its ability to publish that data and make that open is relevant to what they want to do. Additionally, like there are a lot, like the nature of the EVM, for example, is so composable, like anybody being able to deploy a smart contract. I think fintech and like traditional finance are only really just waking up to like how big of a deal it is going to be. Like, I can't imagine going to those people over there in FiDi and being like, I've got a pitch for you. You're going to let any user in the world run arbitrary code on your servers. No shot, right? That's like a nightmare. That's like such a foreign concept that might even be possible in the world of traditional finance. And so for that reason as well, chains are useful. It's because they have a new substrate where anybody can run applications on top of a chain and have a much better, more composable experience and like build apps on top of the primitives that these institutions offer. Anyway, so I'm getting rambly here, but the point is there are value in chains. And it may be the case that the really decentralized bridging that we've set out for L2s is really useful for ETH because we want ETH to be around for our kids, great-grandkids, et cetera, but is not going to be as useful or as relevant to assets that are essentially issued. Does that mean that there's no value to be provided by Ethereum and L2s? I don't think so.
And that's interesting. So you're alluding to sort of the value prop for a fintech company of having anyone be able to run arbitrary code, build all these financial primitives. Do you have anything in mind that you feel like fintech companies and others deploying chains should be exploring that they shouldn't? Is there like a use case that really excites you or a feature someone should build that no one is?
Like that it should be, but aren't?
Yeah. I think we're doing the obvious, like put your assets and a DEX on a chain and let people trade it or whatever. What's the non-obvious thing that you think people should be thinking of?
I think it's a give and take. I think like the beauty of Ethereum is that like Ethereum wasn't really able to perfectly answer that question at the outset either, but it knew that allowing anybody to write an application on top of this platform is going to be a really, really, really powerful tool. And a lot of things in Vitalik's white paper totally came true in practice. And like we have Polymarket in the prediction markets, we have a bunch of DAOs, we have a bunch of finance. But for example, we didn't realize just how crazy powerful that finance was going to get. And nobody like read the Ethereum white paper and immediately went, oh my God, the money Legos are here. Let's start pitching these fintechs. But as time goes on, those use cases became clear and it worked out. So Yeah, I don't know that I have some like golden goose startup opportunity for someone in the audience to immediately run up and grab and like this is the reason to be doing all of this. But I just think as time goes on, as people continue being like given the opportunity to build applications that interface more closely with the block space that these institutions bring to the table, I think they'll pay a lot of dividends, and we'll see a lot of really cool stuff that, just like with the start of Ethereum, was hard to predict.
And you might give me a frustrating answer to this of the same, but how do you see these chains differentiating and competing? Like, are we going to have a chain per fintech company that are all just, the same Superchain standard config, or are they going to be differentiating and competing on interesting dimensions?
I definitely don't think in the long run we'll be competing on technology. We might compete on the usage of technology, but again, our platonic goal for the OP stack is that it does everything, and it is this perfect open source code base to do whatever it is you want to go and do. And I think, if we look at the internet, that's a pretty likely scenario to, it's like pretty clear that that's what played out in the internet too, right? Like, there's no SaaS startup that is selling themselves as differentiated because of the database that they use or the network transport layer that they're going with or whatever, right? Like none of these things are really relevant. They're like building products and they're like, yo, we have a sick product that you can pay us monthly for. That's where they get the money. That's where they differentiate. So I think we'll see that in Web3 as well. There'll definitely be technological differentiators that, as we continue to grow, like have temporary advantages. And there will also be like very useful technologies that plug into differentiators. So like we'll unlock new technical differentiators that unlock new product differentiators. And then we'll just end up seeing that technical differentiator that unlocked that getting super standardized. And at that point, I think at the end of the day, we're competing on what we should be in industry in the world, which is on products that help people. And so everyone will compete on providing utility to humans. And that is the most important thing of all.
What does the network topology of this end up looking like? Like, does every firm have its own chain? Does every app have its own chain? Do you see a role for places in the long term, like an OP Mainnet? Where does that fit into your vision of kind of how this develops?
Yeah, I mean, the whole like, is the future of app chains or one giant single chain the future is like a very interesting question, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be answered naturally over time. It's like hard to predict. I think what we can say in broad strokes is there will probably be both. There will be use cases that are very centralized, that are relatively siloed, that can get away just running on their own chain, and it will make the most sense from an economic perspective to be running on their own chain. There will also be use cases that want to be applications that compose with and leverage multiple chains that are kind of like independent or like owned by the institutions. And if you want to do something that spans all of them, it makes more sense for that application to be hosted on a shared piece of infrastructure, like something like OP Mainnet, that is a more neutral piece of block space that gives a kind of shared, level playing field for certain kinds of applications that want to compose across many other chains to work on. So yeah, I hope it's not a non-answer, but that's kind of the nature of the beast, I think, is we'll have a bit of both.
But wait, if the idea, this is getting a little in the weeds, but if the idea is that you can deploy something that composes across multiple chains, and that's the reason to be on OP Mainnet, then why not just deploy on your own chain and compose across multiple chains? So what's the value of OP Mainnet there?
Yeah, so this is very in the weeds. I think the real answer comes down to the actually not like the chain that you're deployed on, but the governance structure of the chains that your application is running on, which is like a little similar, but a little bit different. Basically what I mean by that is I think ultimately they're going to be a bunch of chains and a bunch of apps running all over them. And the centralized apps that have big central points of control will have centralized components to the governance of those chains and will like allow the people that are interested in making those chains better to like perform upgrades to like make improvements to that chain relatively unilaterally. So it's not about them creating one chain or the other. It's about them deploying on some chain, of which OP Mainnet I think is a good example, that has a more neutral governance system that application developer couldn't create themselves. It's like they want, in the same way that an app dev deploys on Ethereum, allows them to credibly limit their own control of the application. It's like only the rules of this smart contract can be followed, no matter what I, as the application developer, do, which is very unusual. It's kind of like that, but for cross-chain stuff.
And What? Sorry, were you gonna say something?
Well, I want to play it back to you and ask you about MEV because that's something that we haven't talked about, and you're one of the foremost experts in, along with your organization. So I don't know. MEV is a whole other part of the story that I didn't want to jump into without knowing what the heck MEV is. So Robert, what's MEV, bro?
MEV, it stands for Maximal Extractable Value. It's the value that you can extract from transaction ordering. Basically, having the right transaction at the right place at the right time. If someone buys a bunch of assets on one exchange, that might mean that there's an arbitrage opportunity between that exchange and another one. And so MEV is the money that you could make by arbing between two different exchanges. And it ends up being kind of a really deep and important problem in how these chains work, how people who are interacting with them and trading with them, how good of outcomes they get, what kind of negative externalities are left by the games that people play to capture MEV. And it I think is a really important part of the story for why crypto will end up being successful or not.
Yeah, I think one mental model for MEV that's very oversimplified is just transaction ordering matters, and if there's a transaction that anybody could make that makes them a little bit of profit, like that arbitrage, who ends up being able to do that is very relevant, and the economics of that are super relevant. I guess my mental model for the MEV landscape today is basically there are these validators that are actually producing the blocks, and they basically expose an API where a bunch of bidders can say, hey, this is the ordering of transactions you should have. Another one says, hey, this is ordering transactions you should have. And the validator kind of looks at that, says, okay, who's going to pay me the most here? I'll choose that ordering. I think my suspicion is that there's something deeper, and nowhere in that story was the application developer. And this seems very relevant to will there be app chains? Is MEV for app chains is now a thing, but MEV for apps kind of is a thing today that we just don't think about. Anyway, that's kind of a ramble, but do you have thoughts on that? Am I speaking crazy, or does that make sense?
Well, so a lot of people will deploy apps on chain, and then they will discover that their apps create a lot of value that is leaked to these sophisticated parties that run bots or to validators. And so we've got our Link Marines in the crowd here somewhere. We work with Chainlink as an example. Their Oracle updates create opportunities to clear out collateral from lending protocols. And these can be worth millions of dollars sometimes. 2 weeks ago, we had an Oracle update from Chainlink that went through our infrastructure that got them paid back $100,000 in a single transaction because there was a lot of money to be made from having the right transaction placed in the right place at the right time. And Chainlink wants this to go to Chainlink, or they want to redistribute it to their partners in some way. You don't want to just leave this money on the table. But it is hard and kind of complicated to recapture this value as an application. And so people work with projects like Flashbots or some other people to try to enable applications to capture the value from transaction ordering that they've got. One way that you can do that is by using our infrastructure on Ethereum mainnet. Like I was saying, Chainlink had this $100,000 repayment of MEV that otherwise would have been left on the table, as an example. Another way that you could do that is by launching your own chain. If you think that you can get a lot of usage and a lot of users, then kind of naturally, if a lot of fees are being paid from transaction ordering, you can capture that if you're running the chain's sequencer or its validator. I think it's a very interesting question for the long term in the industry of sort of how, as an application developer, do you monetize or do you want to monetize? Are we going to force everybody to launch their own chain? Maybe that's the equilibrium in the end, and that's how these things work. Or do you end up having some other ways where, just by nature of deploying an app on somewhere, you receive all the value that it creates back to you? And there's 4 or 5 different experiments that are ongoing, and nobody's sort of cracked the code exactly on how to let apps monetize from the value that they're creating. They're mostly, in the history of crypto, have been leaking so far. And when I'm saying value, I also mean this is in the order of hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars annually too. We're not talking small amounts of money.
Yeah, it's huge. And I mean, I look back to a few years ago, and I almost think there's a period where MEV had kind of a bad rap in some sense. So there's a negative connotation there. Like everyone was getting sandwiched and my slippage is worse and my trade isn't executing at a better price because these bots are going crazy and paying the validators these little bids to change the ordering. It sounds like I'm hearing, but I mean, just holler if you agree or disagree, but it sounds like you're saying MEV is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I guess you would just call it a property of these systems. Like I guess the reason I asked this is because you didn't mention a future where there's no more MEV. And I feel like there was an era of like, we need to kill the MEV. It's like, it's death to MEV. Do you agree with that?
MEV is just the money that's left on table in having the right transaction at the right place at the right time. It's kind of the economic engine behind these systems and why they work. And it's always going to be there, but our task is to develop systems that channel it into positive outcomes for users. So there's all sorts of DEXs these days that use MEV to give users a better price. And I think in the long run, it's that kind of system that ends up deciding whether or not we outcompete TradFi. Like, why is anyone going to trade on these chains? Why is anyone going to use them? It's because they give them better outcomes than traditional systems do. And in TradFi, you have these super entrenched market structures. They're extremely hard to change. It's extremely hard to kind of experiment with new ways of routing value. Our opportunity in crypto is to try a lot of experiments on what can actually deliver better outcomes for users. And to use MEV to do that, because MEV is the economic incentive to get people to do things. So MEV certainly has a lot of bad outcomes. The task is just, or it has a lot of negative externalities it has in the past. The task is to try to harness that in order to make it a positive thing for users, because that ends up being an integral part of why this industry will win or fail, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, MEV in TradFi is like spending $10 billion to run a new fiber optic cable secretly under a mountain so that you can get 0.001 milliseconds better trade. It feels like we have an opportunity here to democratize that a little bit. And just because people can extract from financial systems doesn't mean that there's not opportunity to do it in a better way.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you're always going to have this competition to win. You're always going to have this competition to get ARBs. The task is, how do you channel that into something that gives a user a better outcome? And so we really like auctions at Flashbots. Instead of just letting one way this manifests is users have their trades auctioned off. So who can give the user the best price to execute their trade, as an example, instead of sort of payment for order flow market structures that aren't as competitive in TradFi.
Ask not what you can do to extract, but what extraction can do for your users. Yeah.
Ben is full of bangers. Yeah.
We got to close it out strong. And I mean, I think we're at time, so maybe that's the banger we ended on.
Thanks everybody for listening. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.